Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. Trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is home ownership consultant Ross Kay from thewealthyhomeowner.ca. Welcome back to the show, Ross.
Thanks for having me back, Jim.
Ross, we have a listener question. They ask, we purchased a home from a realtor and later found out the home we purchased was listed with our realtor's husband. We were never told about this, and now we feel we paid too much and were misled. Do we have any recourse?
Do you have any recourse? First of all, there's a couple of avenues available to every Canadian, pretty much in every province. You've got your provincial regulator who oversees provincial trading legislation in your province, and then you have your local courts. So really that's where this discussion should start. What I would answer the question with this without knowing more details in this case is this is how I would approach these people with an answer. If you are dealing in the province of Ontario, for the sake of the argument, or the province of British Columbia, okay? In Ontario, the provincial regulator has allowed a husband and wife who work in the exact same real estate office share the exact same real estate individual office themselves, who uses the exact same secretary, use the exact same answering machine, uses the exact same filing cabinets, phone numbers, email addresses, to practice dual agency without even having to disclose it to the clients that they're dealing with. And up until about 3 years ago, that was not even possible. It hadn't been legally allowed for the 70 years organized real estate has, been substantial enough in size to impact the market. It's only been the last couple of years that this is possible. It became possible because the regulators lacked the understanding of how the real estate business operates. What I mean to say is this. Real estate in Canada is dominated by franchise brands, whether it's Remax, Royal LePage, Sutton Group, Century 21, Caldwell Banker. These are all big franchise brands. They're not real estate companies. They're simply real estate branding companies or real estate brokers. In other words, a small broker can pay a franchise fee and get a big name attached to their brokerage. This really has not been problematic in the past, and initially that was done so brokerages could handle referrals crossing the country. But today it's become a major problem because this is what has resulted. There is what's called a sub-franchise, where for the sake of the argument, a Remax franchise holder in a city is allowed to sub-franchise his brokerage to another broker. And that would be a way that a husband and wife realtor team could legally get around having to even disclose that they were going to get double commissions into their own single bank account as a result of a real estate transaction where the husband represents the wife, the buyer, and the wife represents the seller of the exact same home being purchased. What happens here is this. You'll see the branding for brokerages has changed. It used to say John Smith Brokerage or John Smith Broker. Then it became Remax John Smith Broker, and over time it would have become Remax Vancouver Brokerage. Now what we've added is this. Remax Vancouver John Smith Broker, where John Smith owns his own brokerage called Remax Vancouver John Smith Brokerage, while his wife works at Remax Vancouver Brokerage. The government is saying those are two different entities simply by paying a simple one-time $5,000 fee to get your brokerage name registered. Immediately upon that happening, the husband and wife no longer have to disclose that they're involved in the transaction. They no longer have to sign disclosure documents telling the buyer or the seller, hey, wait a second, that's my spouse on the other end of the commission table. For over 70 years, that was impossible. But once again, organized real estate slipped one through the book. It allows a husband and wife team or two partners who sell real estate, could be, and I mean business partners, to double dip or double earn commission without having to disclose to the consumers, the buyers and the sellers, that this double dipping is going on because it's deemed to be not double dipping anymore. So a simple question has a complicated answer that the regulators themselves did not foresee when they allowed these exceptions to take place. So you can imagine this listener being confused, Jim, because the regulator themselves were confused when they allowed this to happen. There's no regulator in their right mind who would allow a husband and wife team, one to represent the buyer, one to represent the seller, earn double commission. They reside in the same office. The money goes into the same bank account, and they talk to each other nonstop without disclosing that to the two people they're dealing with, when in fact that's exactly what's going on. So, do we have recourse? I would argue in a small claims court action, you do have recourse because irrelevant of the legislation, you could bring in details that up until 2 years ago, this was a disclosure requirement. The realtors knew they should disclose it, but for their own personal gain, they didn't. They didn't do their due diligence. They didn't protect the client the way that they're required to protect them.
Ross, my question is, should that old rule be brought back again?
This is the rule that should be in force that organized real estate and the real estate brokerage franchising model fears. No individual real estate brokerage or sub-brokerage should be allowed to represent both the buyer and the seller of the same home. It should be outlawed. It should have been outlawed around 1995. There was a large cohort of real estate brokers across the country, who we were included, who wanted it outlawed. But when I say a large cohort, what I actually mean is it would be less than 2%. We did a large amount of the business. We were active in our organizations. So that's why I said we're a large cohort. In other words, we were able to make a big enough kerfluffle in the business that this had to come up for a vote, but we lost because the franchise brands, the franchise branding companies, not real estate companies, they're simply franchise branding companies, would have been devastated had that law been put in force. So the only workaround that a buyer has today is to deal with an exclusive buyer brokerage, not an exclusive buyer broker, not with a buyer sales representative, but with an exclusive buyer brokerage, which means their brokerage does not list real estate. They never represent sellers. They have no legacy of representing sellers, because the moment you have a legacy of representing sellers, there is a legal problem that is attached to your brokerage. You cannot legally give full and unbiased information to a buyer because you had a previous dealing with representing a seller. So what is the way around this? The way around this is that organized real estate should be split in two. There should be brokerages who only represent sellers and brokerages who only represent buyers. And those brokerages should not cross over. Unfortunately for the Canadian consumer, this works against all of the franchise agreements that are in place across Canada. If this was to take place, for the sake of the argument, the value of Royal LePage stock would be cut in half. The value of your RE/MAX regional franchise grid would be cut in half. Brand new real estate franchisers would come out to represent buyers because all of the old legacy franchise brands all are under a seller-specific model. So, case in point with this couple here. Sadly, you have to follow a predetermined strategy when it's even talking to a realtor. In 2020, I can't even recommend that you just arbitrarily look through the newspaper, go to open houses, talk to friends and family, get recommendations. Those days are gone. The only way to protect yourself, now you've got to remember, Jim, we're talking about on average, the average home purchase, the average price of a home being purchased in Canada today is around $490,000. It's a $500,000 investment. You will never invest, the vast majority, 97% of the Canadian population, will never make a purchase that's as expensive as their home, or the series of purchases that will be added up together will equal the total purchase price of all the homes that you're going to acquire over your lifetime. Today, in 2020, you can no longer simply be satisfied finding a realtor by a recommendation, a friend, a family member. Those days are done. The regulators have saw to it that avenue for you, your ability simply to go out there and meet someone and find somebody that you can trust has been taken away from you. This question being asked is proof of that statement. You no longer know 100% if your real estate broker is representing your interests. The reason you don't know is the rules have been changed. You weren't told about the rule changes. The rule changes are so complicated. The naming structure of a brokerage has become so deceptive that a regular person would have no idea how to tell the difference. But then again, you shouldn't feel bad because the regulators themselves got conned into making this change. We've got a change going on in Ontario right now. The Real Estate and Business Brokers Act is being changed. So the rules and regulations that govern real estate brokers in the province is being changed. The same way that in British Columbia you had your Real Estate Council of British Columbia was folded and the new organization opened up. Well, Ontario, they're trying to change some of the rules that govern real estate agents. What happened is, at the last minute, Organized Real Estate, Tim Hudak, former member of the Conservative provincial parliament here, who is now the CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association, they bought him off. He has no knowledge of how the real estate business works. As a matter of fact, he was in charge when REBA 2002 was enacted, and the realtors fooled him back then. He has just pulled off another win for the realtors, because realtors have hated having the word sales representative or salesperson attached to their name. They have hated it because it tells the public exactly what they are. They're simple salespeople. Be proud of it, embrace it. No, they want you to think there's something different. So somehow, in the last minute here in Ontario, the legislation is already working its way through Parliament. Right now, they have the minister responsible supposedly agreeing, that the realtors are going to be able to call themselves realtors, dropping the word sales representative, or they're going to be able to call themselves real estate agents. Now, this may seem like something minor to your listeners, but I can tell you this is the number one benefit realtors real estate salespeople have wanted for 30 years. They don't want to have to say they're sales rep. They want to be able to hide that from the public. And in the same way that this listener clearly was not told the truth about the husband and wife double-dipping commissions, now realtors in Ontario want you to never hear again that they're simple sales reps.
We'll have more with Ross Kay right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Ross Kay. Ross, the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board announced the average home sold in January was sold for 101% of the listing price. Has the fear of missing out returned to Toronto?
Well, has organized real estate and housing analysts who rely on false metrics been able to craft a narrative that the housing market is getting hotter again? You're darn right they have, Jim. They have inundated the public with these false narratives once again in the first 5-6 weeks of this year. The Toronto Real Estate Board did report for the City of Toronto that the average selling price to list price ratio was, in fact, 101% during the month of January. Meaning, on average, they are claiming, on average, the average home is selling for 1% more than what the asking price was. Now imagine, you're a home buyer, and this is what you hear the average is. You hear this not only from organized real estate, but you hear it reported in the newspapers. You hear everybody talking about it. You hear the rumors of bidding wars, the rumors of this, the rumors of that, everything that causes you to start to panic. Oh, if I don't buy a house now, I'm going to have to pay more next month. The reason for that is that metric, average sales price to list price ratio, was created for the benefit of sellers and for the benefit of the real estate brokerages at a time when the only people who could receive representation, legal representation, were sellers. Home buyers could not get legal representation. So the fear of missing out is something that has been a carefully crafted narrative by organized real estate over decades. And what I would tell your listeners is this. In January, the average asking price of a City of Toronto home was 20% more, well actually 25% more than what the average home buyer was spending. Let me repeat that again. The average asking price was 25% higher than what the average buyer was spending. What you see we have in the metric that I have just explained to you is how you measure where a housing market is over a certain given period of time. Because when home buyers are spending, let's, for the sake of the argument, $200,000 less on average than what the home sellers who are active in the market are asking for their homes, you know that the homes that are being purchased are lower priced. That means the buyers that are active in that month are buying lower priced homes. You also see, with the average asking price being 25% higher, that there's a group of homeowners looking to trade up to another more expensive home. And that group of home buyers right now own homes that are 25% more expensive than the homes buyers are actually buying. In a month later, or 2 months later, a few of those sellers who own more expensive homes, which is skewing the difference upward, will have their homes sell. It will have nothing to do with the price of houses. It's got to do with what houses the group of buyers are buying in a given month. So right now, we know in the City of Toronto that there's a group of sellers looking to buy more expensive homes. That group of sellers disproportionately owns homes that are 25% more expensive than the homes currently being purchased by the buyers that were active in the market in January. Now imagine if you're a home buyer, Jim, and instead of being told, hey, the average selling price is 101% of what the average listing price is, which means, hey man, you better offer full money or more for that house or you're not going to be able to buy it, versus, hey, did you know that the average home buyer is spending 20% less than what the average home seller is asking? I mean, obviously, depending on how you word it, if you're looking at it from the houses that are listed for sale against what the buyers are spending, the spread is greater. If you look at it from what the houses prices are listed, the average house price is listed for sale versus what the average buyer is spending, the difference is the spread percentage is lower. The same way that a housing correction never records the same degree of magnitude, because we talk in percentages, that you do in an upward swing in the prices. The same way that a house that is for sale for $100,000 that sells for $200,000 gets reported as a 100% house price increase, but a $200,000 house that sells for $100,000 becomes a 50% decrease. The metrics that organized real estate use are designed to create the illusion of greater house price gain than actually takes place. So the fear of missing out is built in to every real estate stat that is released. Those stats were created originally for that singular purpose, because home buyers were not being represented at that time. It was caveat emptor. You were at your own mercy. You could not sign a document anywhere in this country that gave you a legal right to representation. You couldn't force a realtor to help you get a lower price. It was against the law. So when these listeners that are hearing these things, the average selling price is 101% of what the average list price is. All they're looking at is a little tiny share of homes that actually sold in the month. Now, how many of those properties were underpriced? How many of those properties were of a higher quality than what was being purchased the previous year? It is an irrelevant metric. The only metric that really matters for home buyers to understand is if the average buyer is spending $100,000, but the average seller is asking $200,000, it means that the $200,000 sellers in the future will be buying $300,000 home. You are going to have another false narrative issued to the Canadian public. In the city of Toronto, you have that false narrative right now. You've got it in Vancouver as well, because we hear fear of missing out in the condo market. When if you break it down to a granular level, you can't find identical homes that are trading hands year over year at a more expensive price. You cannot find one. Notice, Jim, I said one. You can't find one. And if you did find one, you'll find out that it actually sold for less money, because that seller was now under the pressure for whatever reason to sell within a year of buying. Everything that you hear is designed to feed and fuel the false narrative of fear, with fear in the home buyer to rush out and buy now. I would much rather have this get published. The average home buyer is spending 79% of what the average home seller is asking. It has a totally different meaning than saying the average home buyer is spending 101% of the asking price.
Why the divergence in your figure and what the real estate officials are publishing?
Because the real estate brokers are looking for a statistics that they can manipulate in terms of a messaging vehicle. I don't know why, Jim, the world doesn't know this. I don't know why the Bank of Canada doesn't know this. I don't know why CMHC knows this. I don't know why every single economist, housing analyst in Canada uses the fictitious new sales to listings ratio. I have no idea why they do that, because it's been absurd since the day it was first created. I would never, in my entire career, in the 40 years my family sold real estate to thousands and thousands of families, never once would we ever have talked about the new sales to listings ratio. Never once we would have compared sales to listings ratio, because we knew that they are correlating metrics, not causational. They have nothing to do with supply and demand. They have nothing to do with defining a buyer's and a seller's market. They never have. They never will. They simply are metrics that are used by organized real estate to convince innocent Canadian families to make a decision today. I got a big discussion with someone about this yesterday because, I find this is one of the most unethical things that goes on. And, he's saying, well, if people are stupid enough to believe it, they believe it. It's not that Canadians are stupid. It's not that they're foolish. It's not that they're uneducated. It's that the entire world of real estate believes this to be true when, in fact, the data proves it's false. You don't believe new sales to listings ratio is a sign of supply and demand. People ask me, Ross, how do you know if it's a buyer's market or a seller's market? What is the one metric that tells you? Well, we have a metric called the GK13 because the way a housing stock is built means that the type of home you can buy for your home buying dollar today defines the type of market that you're buying in. In other words, if you're buying the 13th best home on the street, if you buy the 13th best home on the street, you are buying into a balanced market. The market does not favor buyers or sellers. If you're buying the 14th best house, it is a seller's market because you are paying more money than what that home is worth. If you're buying the 12th best home, you're buying into a buyer's market because the buyer is getting more home for their dollar than they would in a balanced market. This is a data-driven metric that is time-tested over the last 40 years. It makes it black and white what type of a market you're buying into because the metric is municipality specific. In other words, the same way that you measure the 13th best home in Vancouver is not the same way you measure the 13th best home in Toronto or Windsor or Calgary or Ottawa. It's different in each city. You just have to know how to measure it. That's all. And then you have to look at what's selling and compare those homes against it. And when you're able to do that, you're able to come up with a black and white measure of a buyer's and seller's market. But what I'll tell your listeners is this. New sales to listings ratio has never defined a buyer's or a seller's market. I can say this because if a real estate agent says that and a complaint is filed with a provincial regulator, the realtor will not be able to supply the data, evidence, that will prevent them from being charged by the regulator for deception and fraud. It does not exist. Organized real estate does not have it. They have information that is correlating. This goes back to the discussion in the first a few minutes ago, where I was saying about the average house being the average asking price being $200,000 more than what the average home buyer is spending. That's because housing markets are cyclical. Buying patterns are cyclical. In other words, the owner of the house that's $200,000 more expensive can't move unless someone buys it. Well, the buyer for that home currently has their home listed for sale, and it may be 1 or 2 or 3 steps behind where the average, where the top of the market home is priced. So that could take 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 months of sales taking place before that more expensive home sells. This is why your listeners, if people say, Ross, what proof do you have of this? Ross, you say things here that are not said anywhere else. Okay, so I would tell you to go to the Teranet National Bank House Price Index website. I think it's called House Price Index. And if you look at their just pick any city, and then you'll see the price change. But the bottom part of their chart will say the number of sales pairs counted in a given month. Well, you're not going to see an equal distribution of home sales, of comparable sales. You're not going to see a distribution that aligns with what the real estate board in that municipality has reported. You're going to see a grouping of sales take place at certain months of the year, and then fewer sales in the months that lead up to it. That's because that's how a housing market functions. Joe sells his house in January. Susan, the owner of the house Joe bought, buys her next house in February. The owner of that house goes out and buys their next house in March. The owner of that house goes out and buys their house in April. And in order to make that sale take place, in other words, to make all the timelines work, all of those people close on their homes in June. That is the data that shows up in the Ternet National Bank House Price Index, which then in turn skews the data 3 to 6 months later, because you're aggregating sales that had taken place in January, February, March, April, May, close in June. Oh, well, which month did they take place in? How do we know what price change took place if we're reporting them in June? It's because none of these metrics measure house price change. None of them. All they're measuring is house price illusion. Illusion created through the cooperative listing service in a seller beneficial environment that had a legal requirement to get the highest price possible in the shortest period of time. And since the laws changed, allowing buyers to be represented, not a single new public metric has been issued to make up for that all of those old decades of deceptive marketing practices. There has not been a single metric released. Why? Because the organized real estate would have to go back and admit all of the decades of stories we told you about the housing market was a fraud. We have to come clean. We have to come clean because, back then, we could only represent sellers. I know we pretended we worked for buyers, but legally we couldn't. So that's why we had to do it. That would destroy organized real estate. It would wipe it out. It's why Zillow will pay us $1 million if we simply give them our house price forecasting algorithm. The Zillow Pride, they will pay us $1 million for our simple house price algorithm. We say, sorry, it's priceless. $1 million? Are you joking? How many billion dollars is it actually worth? We can time housing market. The reason why we can time housing market is because we know this is how they work. It's why we were correct in Alberta. We were correct in British Columbia. We were correct in Ontario. And it's why we're correct today in explaining every single change that's taking place in the market. And we're explaining that, no, it is a false narrative that the housing market is getting busier. It's fear. Nothing more, nothing less.
We'll have more with Ross Kay right after the break.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Ross Kay. Ross, the RRSP is here in Canada. The home buyer plan now allows a couple to withdraw $70,000 from their retirement plan to buy a home. Is this a good idea?
Is it a good idea? Okay. So this goes back to 1992. So here's a story for your listeners. In the great housing correction of the early 1990s, organized real estate was facing a drop in membership of historic proportions. There was a fear that the Canadian Real Estate Association would end up going bankrupt because the membership was being forecasted to drop 60%. Organized real estate had to take action. So they started lobbying the government. They lobbied the government for the homebuyer plan. Allow Canadians to use the RRSPs to buy a home. That's what the lobbying started. It was innocent at first, okay? There was some legitimacy to the idea. But like anything that the government touches, without them understanding how the home trading infrastructure works, when they enact a policy, it is a policy that can be capitalized by the stakeholders. The RRSP homebuyer plan is such a policy. All of your listeners should ask, why is the Canadian government not publishing quarterly, or even annually, the amount of RRSPs withdrawn from the homebuyer plan that are not repaid in a calendar year, making that money taxable income in the current year? Why is that number not published? Because we know the one time that it was published, it was a staggering amount that was not being repaid. What your listeners need to understand is this. If a couple withdraws $70,000 from their RRSPs, they are required to pay back 1/15 of the amount they borrow. So 1/15 of 70,000. What's that? I don't know. What's that? $8,000? $8,000 a year. Okay. So whatever the number is. I don't have my calculator in front of me here, folks. It's just off the top of my head. Okay. So if you've got to repay $8,000, let's make it easy. Let's say it's only $6,000 you got to repay, annual. That's $500 a month. It's $500 after tax money a month you have to repay. How many Canadians purchase a home and have $500 a month left over at the end of the month to repay their RRSPs? Now, you've got to remember, if you're hoping to install money in a TFSA or an RRSP, that's on top of the repayment you have to have. If you don't repay the $6,000, at the end of the year, that $6,000 is added to your income and you're taxed on it. So not only are you going to be taxed, but you're going to have to repay that tax with after-tax dollars. This is how it works. So it was innocent when the amounts were small, and it's innocent if your home buying profile, in other words, the profile that you should have done when you purchase a home, allows you to have enough disposable income, spendable income, after all other expenses are taken care of, including this year's current RRSP contribution, to repay the 1/15 of the amount of money that you use from your RRSP in the homebuyer plan. Now, this is how bad this program is, Jim. This is how bad it's designed. CMHC already treats Canadians in certain parts of the country as second-class citizens. What I mean to say by that is that CMHC treats a couple who earns $100,000, who has the identical debt between the two of them, totally different if they're buying a home in Calgary versus buying a home in Toronto. They treat those two couples totally differently. They treat the couple in Calgary as a second-class citizen. They treat the couple in Calgary as if they are financially not as prudent as the couple who's buying the home in Toronto. They treat the couple in Calgary so bad that the couple in Calgary at the end of the year could have $20,000 extra left over in their pocket than the couple in Toronto. Yet the couple in Calgary are not approved for the same amount of mortgage as the couple in Toronto. And they have identical incomes, identical job profiles, identical everything, identical debts outstanding. Yet they're treated as a second-class citizen in Calgary. This has gone on for over 35 years. Yet not a single news report or not a single government in Canada, provincial government, municipal government, has argued with CMHC, why are you treating citizens in our town different than you treat citizens in another town? Why are you asking our financially prudent homeowners to spend less of their after-tax income than you're allowing irresponsible people in Toronto? It just boggles our mind, Jim. It boggles our mind the same way that there are RRSP. So let me conclude today's show with this. CMHC, own ignorance, has caused the inequality of mortgage lending in this country to be even further skewed by the homebuyer plan. That's right. If you're a family buying a home in certain municipalities in this country, CMHC is virtually assuring you you will not be able to repay your homebuyer plan. They are virtually assuring you that you are going to have to spend paying the tax back on the tax you didn't pay, that you used in your homebuyer plan. CMHC has policies in force that make this a mathematical guarantee. CMHC's policies are void of any logic or understanding of how homebuyers interact with their home. That said, when you look at their homebuyer brochures, you shouldn't expect otherwise. We laugh at these homebuyer roadmaps, the homebuyer reports, the homebuyer booklets issued by CMHC, Kenworth, Canadian Real Estate Association, all of the banks in Canada. They're jokes. Those roadmaps, those plans, those outlines that they're giving you are basically leading you into a financial difficulty. Because if they didn't, they would disclose to you how a full implementation of a home buyer plan for a couple who are in the identical income, carries the identical debts in Calgary, in Toronto, will leave you with a radically different ability to repay anything. Your mortgage, your RRSP repayment for the home buyer plan, the amount of money you have available to put in RRSPs for the current year, the amount of money you have to contribute to a TFSA, the amount of money that you're going to have to spend replacing the roof in your home. It is very, very easy to show with data that CMHC will approve a family to own a home in one part of the country where they will spend 100% more of their income. CMHC will approve them to spend 100% more of their income, percentage of their income, on a house than they will in another part of the country. Why is this happening? Why? You people say, Ross, why is there such a widely divergent change in house price change that gets recorded in Toronto and Vancouver and Calgary and Montreal? Well, CMHC is funding that change. CMHC's policies are funding that change. CMHC itself is making houses less affordable in Vancouver and Toronto. You don't have to worry about foreign buyers. You don't have to worry about money laundering. You don't have to worry about vacant homes. You don't have to worry about immigration levels. CMHC's policies, which are the predominant impact for housing affordability in this country, themselves naturally cause unaffordability. But you cannot find that report that exists on CMHC's website. Why? Because they don't understand they're treating some Canadians as second-class citizens. They don't understand that they are treating financially prudent couples who earn $100,000 a year worse than they treat financially imprudent families who earn $100,000 a year, simply by what city those people choose to buy a home in. It is a second-class. CMHC clearly has established classes of Canadians. One class of Canadians we will allow to borrow more and more mortgage money. We will allow them to borrow so much mortgage money that the odds of them making their payments at the end of the month are next to nil. We are going to have another class of citizens where no matter what they do, they're basically never going to be able to spend more on their home than what they're able to cover in a month. Those people are going to have money left over to fill up a TFSA and pay their RRSPs, save for their kids' education. You're not going to hear how CMHC defines the classes of people in this country. Yet the data, the math, says otherwise. CMHC is creating second-class citizens in this country. They do not treat all Canadians equally. They treat Canadians totally different. And it even gets worse, Jim. One family can be a little tiny bit different than another family. A little tiny bit different. And CMHC, let's say that they're 0.001% different between the two families from a financial standpoint, financial prudent standpoint. CMHC will treat that other family about 10% better or 10% worse because of that 0.001 difference. This is not debatable. This is math. So when we get asked the question, should a couple withdraw $70,000 to buy a home? The answer again is municipality specific, family specific, spending specific, debt specific, and educational specific. An educated, informed home buyer with a spreadsheet that has this all laid out before them can make a rational decision. Hey, honey, looks like we're not going to be able to repay that RRSP homebuyer plan installment monthly if we were to buy this home. What do you mean? CMHC says we can buy it. Well, when we look at this, when we're sitting here looking at our spreadsheet, we're looking where we're spending all our money in a month, and we're not going to have enough money left over to repay that plan. And if we do repay it, we're not going to be able to contribute to RRSP this year. Or that trip we wanted to take. That's not possible. Oh, and our car, it's 10 years old. It's got 150,000 miles on it. We're going to have to buy a new car. We're not going to have money for that. CMHC is walking Canadian citizens into a lifetime of financial ruin, potential financial ruin, because CMHC is ignorant. They are ignorant to their own policy. They don't understand how the housing market works. They don't understand how home buyers work through the home buying process. They don't understand the falsehood, the false beliefs that are force-fed to home buyers across this country for generation after generation. It's simply time all of this stuff gets debunked. The question is, when you have realtors who fought to get the home buyer plan in the first place, banks who profited from the home buyer's plan, government who are profiting clearly by the extra tax dollars they're reining in because the home buyer plan repayments are not being made, all of these people, all of these groups, all of these stakeholders are working against you as a Canadian family. They are not working towards your own personal gain. This is the one time that I'm going to say that. You have to step back and take personal responsibility if you're listening to this show today, because I've given you that information here on this show. You no longer have the escape. Oh, I didn't know that. The information is available to you. It's out there available now. This is irrefutable. CMHC treats Canadians unequally. It treats one couple one way and another couple another way, simply by the city they live in, simply by maybe one little tiny 1,000th of a difference between the two of them on a financial perspective. CMHC is the reason why we have an affordability problem in this country. No one else.
Ross, thank you so much for chatting with us.
And thanks for letting me run on today, Jim.
My guest has been home ownership consultant Ross Kay. His website, thewealthyhomeowner.ca. If you have any questions for Ross, you can send them to info@housestreet.com. Find us on Twitter @HouseStreet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HouseStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HouseStreet.com radio is a production of House Street Media Incorporated.